All right. Well, I see the counter has stopped right at around the 200 mark. So I think we are going to start. The first thing I would like to do is invite everybody who's on the call to introduce themselves through the chat. Just let us know your name, where you're from, anything you want to get out of this call particularly. And we encourage you uh, to use the chat function to connect with each other and to let us know what's on your mind. And then also there will be an opportunity to ask questions later, and we will invite that at the appropriate time. But there's another Q&A function in the chat that we would invite you to use to pose your questions. Okay, I think we're going to get going. Welcome, everyone. We have well over 200 people on this call. It is really indicative of the amount of interest and energy there is to measuring the impact of the sport, physical activity, and recreation sector in Canada. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je m'appelle Martin Sanson. I am the grateful CEO of the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association. CPRA's mission is to champion the role that the recreation and parks sector plays in building healthy, vibrant, and increasingly resilient communities in Canada. The sector, I think, is misunderstood. It's evolving, and it is vital. And we are able to make the claim that the sector is vital more and more because of the wonderful work undertaken by the Canadian Fitness Lifestyle Research Institute. I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Christine Cameron in a moment. But we're very, very excited about the tools that we're putting into the sector, which hopefully will help you make the case for our sector in a way that results in elevating our sector's profile in the larger public policy discussion. So, first thing I'd like to do is a land acknowledgement. The Canadian Parks and Recreation Association acknowledges that our work and the work of our members and partners takes place on the unceded and traditional territories of Indigenous peoples across this land. Our national office is located on the unceded territories of the Algonquin and Mohawk First Nations. We honor the deep connection Indigenous communities have to the lands, waters, and skies, recognizing their role as responsible stewards of these lands for millennia. We recognize the harms of colonization and the resilience of Indigenous peoples, and we are committed to advancing reconciliation through action. I want to add one other thought, which was a profound thought that I stumbled upon a couple of years ago when I was, preparing to take on this role. And it was a quote from a woman named Lilla Watson, who is an Indigenous activist and leader in Australia, who said something along the lines of, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because you realize that our futures are bound together, then let us work together." And that's the spirit in which we want to engage all of our constituents across the sector, and of course, our Indigenous friends and neighbors. So, my job now is to introduce the members of the executive. The first person I will introduce, and I'll invite her to speak in a moment, is Christine Cameron, who's the Executive Director of the Canadian Fitness Lifestyle Research Institute, who has been working tirelessly on this project for several years. And I think that, quite frankly, we wouldn't be able to do the work, without CFLRI. They've just been an outstanding partner, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Christine today, who's going to do a couple things. Number one, she's going to talk a little bit generally about the Measuring Impact Project, and then we're going to focus on some brand new tools that we hope are useful to you, the practitioners. Second person I'd like to introduce is Mike Roma, who is CPRA's past president. This project was born under his leadership, and he has stuck with it ever since. Mike has got many roles in our sector. He's the principal at RC Strategies, which is a consulting firm that helps communities ensure that their recreation facilities are up to standard and are, contributing fully to the communities that they're serving. I would also like to recognize Dr. John Spence from the University of Alberta, who is on the call as well. In many ways, John is the conscience of the project. We have a very rigorous methodology, and Christine's going to talk a little bit about that. The rigor of our methodology means two things. Number one, we believe it's bulletproof, that it is a very, very sound methodology. But because we are very, very careful, and again, this is where I'm kind of channeling John, we think that the numbers that we have put forward are probably conservative. So we'll be building that out over the next period. And then the final person I will introduce you to, who will be joining us on the panel a little bit later, is Gord Tate. He is the brand new president of CPRA, long contributor to this discussion as a sector professional. So those are the individuals that you're going to be hearing from today. I just want to remind everybody that the webinar today is being recorded, and we do encourage you to participate in the chat. We have like 260 people on. This is really, really great. So there are going to be a couple of times during the call where we invite you to share a little bit of information about yourself. I'm going to be dropping a web form in because we want to talk to you on another matter, which is our National Infrastructure Database. We'll get to that in a moment, but be aware that we want to invite you to a conversation which we think is ongoing and has multiple facets. Again, use the Q&A function for questions, but jump in the chat for any other comments you have. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Christine Cameron from the Canadian Fitness Lifestyle Research Institute. Chris, it's a joy to see you, and over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Martin. Good afternoon, everyone. So happy that you could join us today for this update of the Measuring Impact initiative. Thanks also to Cassidy, who's going to be working our slides for us. Maybe before we get started, I'm just going to take a moment to introduce my organization, which is the Canadian Fitness and Lifestyle Research Institute, or CFLRI. And we're one of the country's only research organization that's dedicated specifically to sport, physical activity and recreation, or SPAR, as I'll call it throughout the webinar. The CFLRI also actively builds capacity across the sport and recreation system through tailored training programs, such as training for practitioners in evaluation. Also, the development of practical tools, including the ones you'll hear about today, and then also collaborative initiatives that help to empower the sector to implement evidence-based action and strategies. And one of these collaborative initiatives is the Measuring Impact Initiative, and that's why we're all here today. So I will get on to it. Next, please. So the webinar describes the new release of new data, as Martin has said, new tools that attempt to quantify and monetize the impact of SPAR sector in the country. So over the next, about 20 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through some of the data and the resources that are available. I would also like to recognize the executive of the Measuring Impact Project, who will be available to answer questions at the end. Also to acknowledge the expert working group who provided guidance for the project, and to acknowledge the work of Raymond, Chabot, Grant, Thornton, who provided economic expertise. And we'd also sincerely like to thank organizations who provided the funding support for this project. So that includes Parks Canada, CTMPR, the Sport, Physical Activity and Recreation Council, or SPARC. And really, we couldn't have developed this project without this support. Next, please. So we're all required to justify the importance of SPAR in our work, whether it's funding requests or budgets, to add or retrofit infrastructure, or to develop programming. So CFLRI and CPRA, we embarked on this very comprehensive research endeavor to assess the impact of SPAR, and also to provide organizations, municipalities, provincial, territorial, and federal governments with credible evidence and data to justify the value of these services for either new or continued investment. And our goal has been to synthesize the impact data to make it easier for decision makers and policymakers, and also practitioners, to build the case for SPAR among individuals, and also to help build strong, vibrant, and active communities. Next. So in order to assess the overall impact of SPAR, its benefits were analyzed under 4 main categories, or what we call pillars. Social, health, economic, and environmental. The economic impacts of SPAR are clear. There's hundreds of thousands of jobs related to SPAR. Billions of dollars are invested annually in the construction or the renewal of infrastructure, and billions of dollars are injected into the economy through tourism. But in addition to these more easily quantifiable impacts, the socials and communities, some of which we'll touch on here. Next. So this image is directly from the Measuring Impact website, and essentially it summarizes the impact associated with each of the pillars as determined in our foundational report. So the social impact was reflected through SPAR volunteering, and it was estimated at about $13.6 billion annually. The health impact that was attributable to physical inactivity was estimated at $3.9 billion. The economic impact was estimated at $37 billion and included the contribution of SPAR to the gross domestic product and retail sales that are associated with SPAR. And as for the contribution to the environment, this incorporated the replacement value of aging infrastructure at $42.5 billion. So due to the variation in the types of impact, so some being positive, some being a deficit, we considered each pillar separately, and we can't combine for an overall monetary impact. Next. So there were a few key takeaways from the Measuring Impact project. We generally took a conservative approach in the way that the numbers were derived. Martin's already alluded to this. Many of the values were considered underestimates of the true impact, but we've outlined all the caveats in detail in the foundational report. Measuring impact is also one of the only assessments that I'm aware of that looks at the range of behaviors of SPAR to the breadth of the Measuring Impact project. And it really puts us in a much better position to understand the impact and the contribution of SPAR to individuals, societies, and communities, and also to the nation. But the Measuring Impact project really is a work in progress. And despite continually increasing the breadth of the analysis, we're also trying to really refine the precision and the computations and of the values. So finally, this project also helps to validate that the reach and the impact of SPAR far exceeds the SPAR sector itself. SPAR impacts the economy, justice, education, the workplace, the physical environment, and also communities' vitality. Next, please. So all the data and resources are available on our website at measuring-impact.ca. So I think it's been put into the chat. And if you haven't had a chance to visit the site, I really do invite you to look at it. There you can find the full report called The Price of Inactivity, Measuring the Powerful Impact of Sport, Physical Activity, and Recreation in Canada. And this document is really that foundational report for the project, and it provides a very detailed synthesis of both the methodology and statistics. So this report will basically tell you how we calculated the numbers or where we obtained the data. And on the website, you can also find one-page infographic summarizing the data, a 2-page infographic that also helps to include the recommendations for action by the sector, key messages, executive summary findings, FAQs, and also social shareables. And the materials are available in both English and French. Next, please. We've also prepared a data report that for the first time releases supplemental data on the 4 pillars. Now, really we've just focused on the national picture in the foundational report, But this newly released report highlights and showcases provincial and territorial data where it's available. So the series is sort of time-stamped to coincide with the foundational report, but this data will be updated over time. Next. And the next couple of slides just provide just a really high-level sense of the type of data that's available in the new report. And this example illustrates the economic data. And more specifically, it looks at the industry that best represents active recreation. The slide shows that the direct and the indirect economic impacts in terms of GDP generated by the sector's activity, also by province and by territory. So the direct impact refers to the immediate effect, whereas the indirect impact represents that kind of ripple effect from that initial economic activity. Next slide. So this is an example of the data that we collected in the social pillar. And the data illustrates the perceived role that SPAR contributes to networking and inclusion in the community cohesion, a sense of trust and reliance, and also community pride. And somewhere between about 44–55% of adults cite SPAR as contributing moderately or to a great extent to these types of community-based indicators. Next. We can then illustrate also the environmental pillar with a snapshot of data within this slide and the next. So we examined the perceived levels of satisfaction with the quality and accessibility of places and spaces to be active. And this slide shows the perceived accessibility and comfort of using various sport and recreation related facilities. So, for example, perceptions that individuals of various abilities or disabilities feel comfortable using the facilities, or individuals of different gender, different cultures, different ages. And relatively few are not at all satisfied, but there was actually a fairly high level of uncertainty about accessibility, that's shown in the gray. Next slide. We also looked at the availability and how frequently indoor and outdoor recreation facilities, parks and green spaces were used. So we combined some and frequently used columns, and we see that there's a high level of usage of parks, green spaces, natural environments, and waterways, trails, and also pathways. But a greater percentage of indoor and outdoor sport and recreation facilities were either never or rarely used. And these are really important findings because it encourages us to look further, to look at the barriers of facility usage. And that is where one can speculate that affordability or convenience may come into play. Next, please. And so now we shift to examples of data within the health pillar. And this slide shows the costs attributable to physical inactivity by the type of condition. And I recognize this is a super busy, very busy slide. And I just wanted to provide you with a sense of the level of detail of data that's available within the report. In our calculations, we look at the impact of 7 conditions: CVD, stroke, type 2 diabetes, various cancers, hypertension, and osteoporosis. At another time, we also look at depression. There's another, this is just another example where we're looking at costs that are split between the direct costs and then also the indirect costs that are associated with mortality. So the direct represents the majority of costs, including physicians, hospital visits, and drug costs. And this data then was examined by province and territory, which will provide you with that jurisdictional level data. Next, please. Now I'm going to completely shift to another free product that we developed to measure impact, which are online calculating tools to allow users to implement the measuring impact data for their own projects or their own purposes. And the rationale for the calculators is to let governments and organizations tell a similar impact story using a common and defendable methodology. So 2 tools have been developed: a more comprehensive and detailed tool that allows organizations and governments to evaluate annual impacts. But secondly, a construction project tool also allows users to estimate the impact of construction and annual operating impacts of a potential project that they may have. Next, please. So some of the key inputs depend really on what calculating tool is selected. But the common annual inputs across both calculators include annual operating costs for the proposed type of infrastructure listed. So these costs include those required for maintaining and operating the facility or other overhead costs like management and administration. The tool requires an estimate of the annual number of users of the facility, so not visits, but unique users. It requires an annual estimation of volunteer hours for activities within the facility. So these include the hours that are attributable to project, facility, operations, and programming at a volunteer level. It also requires the annual number of provincial, territorial, national, or international events that will be hosted in the proposed project facility, and also the average number of attendees at these events. And then the tool requires an estimated tree coverage associated with the facility if it's an outdoor one. So as mentioned, these were all annual inputs that would generate annual impacts. And there's one exception to this, and that would be the one-time facility construction costs for the period of the bill. And this applies only if you're using the project-based calculator. So it is possible you may not have all of this information, and that's okay. Whatever inputs you can provide will be what the calculator bases the impact outputs on. So to get this information, you may need to consult with the facility administrator or other municipal departments, but it really is okay to use your best estimates. Next, please. So next, we're just going to preview the calculator, and specifically, we're going to show you the project-based calculator in the interest of time. We have limited time here. You can access the calculators on the Measuring Impact page. So that was measuring-impact.ca under Resources. So you can either find it as soon as you enter the website, or you can find it under Resources. And there you'll have an introduction to the calculator. And at the very bottom of the page, you're going to need to click on the affirmation accepting the conditions of use. So once you've clicked on that agreement, then you'll be entered into the calculator. And we're going to create a fictitious example here. So if a user feeds the sample values into the tool, they'll receive a summary of the estimated output produced for a project. So we've inputted a sample project, which is a construction of an indoor pool in British Columbia with 160 million capital costs, 1.5 million in operating costs, estimated 20,000 annual users, an estimated of 1,500 volunteer hours, and 4 provincial events. And I think we put in 500 participants at the event. So when all of these are entered, we will hit submit at the bottom, and then we'll take a look at the output report. Oh, and we got booted out. I don't think normally that happens, but you know what? It's always the glitch of technology. So we'll just have to enter that amount. We could even just put in a quick estimate. So we're going to put in 160 million and 1.5 million in operating costs.
Always the way, eh, Christine? Always the way.
Always, always. We said 20,000 users, which is pretty close there, 12 months out of the year. The volunteer hours was 1,500. And the number of events was 4. And the participants was 500. Pretty close. It's close enough. Anyways, we hit that and we'll see the output that you'll get. So the first part of it looks at the human health impacts, and these are annual. So it's represented by the estimated costs that are averted. So that is the impact of those certain non-communicable disease we talked about, those 7, depression separately, and also air pollution. Now that's coming in at 0, you see right now, and that's because it was an indoor facility. If we'd chosen an outdoor one, it would have asked you about tree coverage, and then we would have had an estimated health value attributable to air pollution. Then we also look at the estimated economic outputs. Now, as I mentioned, the construction costs are a one-time with that reflect the build. So these would not be annual. This would be the one-time costs, and that appears under construction. So there you're seeing the contribution to the gross domestic product, and also to in the operations, you're seeing it also to employment. We see an estimate for volunteering, and we see an estimate for tourism. Now remember, except for the construction, these are all annual impacts. So this is just reflecting 1 year of those impacts. Now we're just going to flip back to the slides. One thing I did want to mention, though, as we wrap up the last of the slides and we put the slides back up, is the health benefits might appear low to some individuals, but the reason for that is because it's the values that are attributable to physical inactivity, and we generate that through the literature, and that's why it might seem lower than what you'd expect, is because those are the values that are attributable to physical inactivity. Next slide, please. So measuring impact, the project does not end here with these tools and these releases. We're constantly refining and updating the data. We're looking for new sources of data. We're looking to update the time series. We're looking for new and innovative types of data to incorporate. And we're also looking at various segments, because we've tended to focus on adults, but we're also exploring children and youth and looking for seniors as well. We're also looking to explore how to release the updated findings through new products and new tools. And the calculators in the supplementary report are just a few examples of this. We're also looking at new collaborations. One example is the work that we've been doing with the provinces and territories for incorporating measuring impact into strategic planning. And then we're also looking at linking with other resources to help provide almost like a one-stop shop for governments, municipalities, and organizations. So some examples are listed here. CPRA's infrastructure database. CFLRI has a course on evaluation for physical activity practitioners that's being released shortly. Community Metrics Initiative. And then we have several other guides, including those to influence decision makers and municipal guide through ALACD. So we are happy to hear from you, though. Throughout the webinar or during the question and answer period, please let us know how you are using data, how you'd like to use data, and if you think, how do you feel these tools are useful in your work? We'd like to hear from you in the chat or in the question and answer. But I am going to now turn it back to Martin for the next segment, and we're going to hold question and answers to after the next segment, if you don't mind. So just moving on to the next slide.
Yeah, that's amazing, Christine. Thank you so much for that. And folks, yes, I do encourage you to post questions in the Q&A chat. That way we can address them as they come in when we get to that point. But if you're putting the questions in the chat, we may not see them in the same way. So if you go to the Q&A section, that would be better. And while I have you, I'm going to do a quick commercial on something else. So I just dropped a link to a sign-up page on the CPRA website. This is about helping you input your physical recreation infrastructure assets into CPRA's National Infrastructure Database, which is directly adjacent to this project. So I'm going to come back to this a couple of times, but if you need help uploading your data about your infrastructure assets in your community, go sign up for this and we will follow up with you and we'll tell you what we're talking about and how we can help you do it. I'll come back to it in a moment. But right now, I would like to introduce Gord Tate and Mike Roma. So I already made a general introduction. Gentlemen, have you both come on camera, please?
We are here.
You're there? Okay, perfect. I see you. So Gord Tate's been working in the sector for many moons. He got his start, I think, running a small outdoor recreation business in BC. He's back in Chester, beautiful community in Nova Scotia, and is for the last 15 years been the acting living coordinator, but has evolved his role. So he's looking very carefully now at a very specific infrastructure project in his community, which I can let him touch on in a moment. Gord is the president of CPRA, has been on the board for years, was also the chair of our Finance Risk Management Committee, but is the newly minted president. So, Gord, welcome. Gord also wants to know why more people don't play bike polo. Because he's an avid biker and people think his family's weird because they're engaged in that. Well, we don't think you're weird, Gord. We think you're interesting. And then the other person that I will introduce again is Mike Roma, past president of CPRA. He's a principal at RC Strategies, great company. They're involved in all sorts of great projects right across the country. I encourage you to go to, visit RC Strategies website. Mike is easy to reach. He's pretty much everywhere. If you need to connect with him, you can do so through me and the info@cpra.ca email address. So Mike should be on as well. All right, so we have some questions. And I think the first one is going to you, Gord. And it may be very timely for you given the project that you're working on, which is how do you currently or how have you in the past explained the benefits of your projects? Like how do you measure impact and then how do you communicate that impact?
Yeah, so not well, I think is the quick answer to that, Martin. So generally, like many of us, we have general benefit statements, very qualitative type information, but quantitative has always been much more elusive. I mean, what I can point to in past communication to my council, for example, is what I would call preference and potential kind of data. So, for example, if I know that 20% of cyclists would feel comfortable riding on a paved shoulder in our municipality, and I know that we have roughly 200 cyclists, avid cyclists, that would equate to about 40 people that who might benefit from our investment of X million dollars to build out that infrastructure. So that's kind of been the level of sophistication, which is not very sophisticated, granted. But I've never been able to add into that then also the health and the economic benefits or the social benefits in any quantitative way. So I'm looking forward to kind of the potential of the calculators that we have at our disposal now to help me make that case.
So this is a game changer, right? Like if we haven't been doing it particularly well before, we now have a tool that I think helps to address one of the significant challenges we face as a sector, which is that the sector is really misunderstood. I mean, the value of the sector, I don't think is appropriately reflected in the broader public policy discussion. So are you, as a practitioner on doing a project like you're doing right now, you excited about this? Do you think it's a game changer?
I will go as far as to say it's a game changer, yes. But I think, for the almost 300 people on the call here, it's up to us also to discover how we're going to change the game by using this kind of tool. So I put that challenge out to all of us. I think in the next question, I'll give you one example that I've been thinking about. But I know Mike has some thoughts on this first question as well, maybe a little bit more sophisticated approach too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah, for sure. And Mike has a unique vantage point. So, Mike, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, I work in a whole bunch of different communities. I've had the privilege of working on thousands of projects in parks and recreation over my career, and every one of them has to do with some kind of depiction, articulation of benefit. And I'd say traditionally, that has been done through the economic side of things. So applying economic multipliers to things like capital costs and operational costs. So those storylines have been in the sector before. I'd say they haven't always been accessible, and they might seem a little bit, daunting for some of us to use. But as a consultant, I definitely access those. But where I think we've fallen short is really, as Gord mentioned, in the social and health elements, and relying on anecdotal statements from community engagement, or maybe studies from other countries until now that we have a tool that gives us some articulation of those social and health benefits. And I'd also say makes the economic elements, like the event-based tourism impacts and the GDP and labor income, I think it makes it a lot more accessible to everybody in the sector now, instead of those who might be, I don't know, economic geeks, if you want to call it that, or people that really dive into it. So I think it's a game changer for sure. And I think that's all I have to say on that one, Martin.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Mike, you and I, I remember we started this conversation 2.5 years ago, but the same sort of question to you, like game changer. Do you feel that this is the right tools right now? I recognize there's a lot of work to be done. One thing we've learned through this project is it's hard and there's room for improvement. But what's your overall, you've been in the sector for a long time. You were one of the voices instrumental in leading us down this important path. How are you feeling about it? Excited?
I think it's super important for our sector. I think it's important because other places that governments can put their investment do a better job at telling these kind of stories, and we're getting better at that, which means hopefully we'll get more of our share. We all believe these are essential services. I think the other thing that I think is really important that might not be as visible to everybody on the call, or everybody who's in the sector, is I think we're taking a step towards being more equal to our peers in other countries and other regions that do a way better job of telling this story. And it starts with telling the story better. And after you're able to do that on a consistent basis, then investment comes, and then real change happens. People are more active. We get, at least investment to sustain the assets that we have. But really, it just leads to the manifestation of these benefits in an even better way than we're seeing right now.
Amazing. So Gord, a question for you. How are you going to use the data and the calculators in your work?
Yeah, so you alluded to this earlier, but so I have a new job now for the municipality of Chester, which is my title is Recreation Facility and Open Space Lead. So what that really means is that my job is to support a community steering committee to develop or redevelop a recreation facility to replace the 1970 era arena that we have. And we're very, very early on in that process. So as an exercise in kind of scenario planning, I actually played with the tool a couple of days ago, and just to prepare for this webinar, obviously. But I was curious about what kind of conversation I could use the tool to host with the steering committee that I am now supporting. So Kelsey just threw this up on the screen, and this is completely hypothetical for everyone on the screen or on the call, but I just wanted to again play with the numbers. So just to run you through this quickly, scenario one is we're building only a rink and we're putting a capital investment of $25 million into it. Scenario two is now beyond the rink, we're adding, let's say, a gymnasium and a pool, and $55 million is our capital investment. Those numbers might seem low, I realize, and just playing with the inputs. And then I was curious if we add one more feature, maybe we add a fitness center to this facility as well. So that's where we get to the number 4 in scenario number 3. So just playing with those inputs to see then what the outputs would generate. So very quickly, just to orientate you to the slide, like if I double my investment from scenario 1 to scenario 2, I see like a 10-fold increase in those non-communicable disease impacts from 60,000 to 711,000. And then if I just add that one more feature into the multiplex, as I'm calling it, I'm getting almost a 20-fold increase in those non-communicable disease value burden averted. And that plays out with the depression as well, because I'm describing indoor facilities, as Christine said, air pollution is not really captured there. When you get into the economic impacts and the outputs there, you do see more of that 2 times multiplier for the capital increase that you're putting in, or capital input that you're putting in. So again, happy to share this with anyone, but this was just an exercise I went through, because as I support this steering committee and we start to get into these discussions, like, what are we actually going to spend here, folks? What do we have and what do we need to try to achieve with our capital campaign so that we can scope all the different things that we're looking for? I thought this scenario planning approach was probably a useful and worthwhile way of diving into those calculator tools. So there's one example of how I know that I will actually use this in real life here for our projects.
That's amazing. That kind of segues into the next question, which I'm going to pose to Mike, which is, how do you think the calculator and the associated data will help you educate decision makers, as they make decisions about these projects? You're doing this all the time, Mike. Again, this data, these tools, are they compelling to decision makers, and are they a necessary part of the recipe to doing what we all want to do, which is ensuring that recreation and parks are contributing as much as they possibly can to the health and vibrancy of our communities?
Yeah, it's a good question, Martin. Like, I think from a provincial, territorial, or federal level, these kind of tools might help those decision makers realize that our sector makes a difference in the jurisdictions that they're usually looking after, like health and education and broader economy. So hopefully it means a shift maybe in their thinking and their investment there at the local level. Whether your local elected officials believe they're in the healthcare business or not, they are in the healthcare business. And I think what this information does is it shows them that there is real impact for decisions that support parks and recreation in a variety of different ways. So it really helps them connect those dots and like make it real, as opposed to some of those anecdotal comments or survey results and so on that we're using traditionally. I think the other thing that's really important here is this becomes a common way for us all to depict benefit, to articulate and quantify social and health and economic and environmental impact. And it does so in a credible and rigorous way. So we should kind of all be proud of this, first off, be confident in it, and also know, and this is kind of skipping ahead to the next question, but also know that this is going to continually get better as we move forward. And but it's starting right now at a really strong place. And I know Christine mentioned that we had a very reputable management consulting firm and economic focused firm help us with this. And I mean, that'll help build the credibility, but so too will us all embracing this, using it, and telling a common story across all of our communities and in all of our conversations.
That's great, Mike. So we do have a fourth question here, which I'm going to pose to you, Gord. What information are we missing? What do we need to do to further enhance the utility of this data set and this tool?
Yeah, a few thoughts that come to mind. So I'm really excited and interested for the integration with the geographic data that we have growing through the database. So to go back to your plug earlier for the active exchange work and the CPRA database. So I think once we start to see that integration, I've seen some early versions of this, but I know that we'll be able to locate facilities and see patterns of movement around those facilities, and then translate those patterns of movement to some of these economic and health and social benefits that we're talking about in a quantifiable way. So I think that's really interesting. In terms of what's missing, I'd love to be able to see a little bit more data specific to youth and seniors, for example, and see how that then should translate into the outputs that the calculators can produce for us. Co-location. So I'm curious about things like when I'm talking to decision makers and we're talking about siting. So can the data help us point towards specific siting strategies, so proximity to schools or seniors complexes or whatever it might be, and along the lines, like the calculator touches on this already, but grouping of facilities too. So that was the model of the scenarios that I went through. And just to be maybe out of my depth and provocative, I'm curious about the future role of AI in the data too. So for example, I was, a simple scenario I would throw is like, I've got $40 million to spend. Hey, AI, tell me like the optimal configuration of scope and facility types, given my demographics, my socioeconomic status, and my stated preferences in my community, and give me something to work with. So I think that's an interesting future use of the data when we start to see some of that integration coming along. So there's a few thoughts.
That's
Mike,
amazing. Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead, expand on that.
Sorry, Martin. I might just add to that. So, like, one thing that is, it's either clear to you if you've already studied what's been produced so far, or I just want to make clear to you now, is that although this is comprehensive and it tells a great story and it's a great tool and it's a great study that's been done, it is limited because of the information and the data that we have available to us in Canada. We are a little bit behind other countries in terms of impacts of SPAR on things like disease or quantifying those impacts. And as more information becomes available, or as more research occurs, either through our efforts or the efforts of our broader Parks and Rec community, we're going to be even able to tell this story better. And one of the things that in my line of work would be ideal to have, and we don't have yet, is not only to be able to talk about the impact of physical activity in general on the population, but to be able to talk about the specific types of physical activity, like a sport or use of a trail or bike polo, because Gord's itching to tell that story. And to be able to start to articulate the differences between activities and the impacts that they have. So you won't be able to do that with this version of the tool. You can still talk about the impact in general, for sure, which is very valuable. But I think one of the other things we'll eventually look at is, and Gord already mentioned this, but differences in terms of the impacts of different age demographics and different types of activities that people might want to participate in. But again, it is very dependent on the academic community that we have in Canada, and also anybody else, any other communities that are generating this research that could feed into the model in a more detailed or better way.
So on that note, let's do another commercial. If you are in possession of research that you think could complement or expand what we're doing with measuring impact, please get in touch. info@cpra.ca is the easy way to reach us. You can always write to me at martin@cpra.ca as well. I also, since I'm doing a bunch of commercials, you're going to hear CPRA use the phrase collective impact an awful lot in the next little while. You are a member of that collective. One of the things that we're doing is launching a policy and research collective. And so the goal of that table will be to identify all of the excellent research that's taking place and then mobilizing it and sharing it with all of you. So it's early days yet, but two things. You're part of the collective, and we are starting to aggregate all of the different research so that we can share it with you fine people so that you can use it to advance your objectives. Okay, so I think we have about 11 minutes left, and we have 13 questions. So we're not going to get to them all. We are going to do our best to respond to some of them in writing. Excellent. I wanted to get Christine back on the line. So I'm going to go through the questions in the order that we received them. So Amber asks, well, for the barriers of low non-usage of the facilities outlined in the report, can you touch base on the biggest barrier, please? So, Christine, what the question is what are the barriers to usage that the research surfaced?
Yeah, it depends who you're asking, whether it's the population or whether it's administrators within either municipalities, schools, workplaces. But what we're finding with some of the population data, the most recent population data, is we're asking about whether or not the facilities are safe, welcoming, convenient, accessible, available. And the one that generally they're all high except for affordability. And that's where we're seeing, lower rates of it being moderately to greatly affordable. So I would say right now that's probably peaking at one of the higher barriers in terms of, looking at facilities specifically.
Okay. All right, next question from an anonymous attendee. Can you please clarify the difference between users and visits for the calculator?
Yeah, so I think there's another question that might tie into this is looking at how do you actually calculate users, which is a tricky one, and I might get Mike to be involved, but what we're trying to get at is essentially, because we don't want to have double counting or triple counting within terms of a user repeatedly using a facility. We're trying to be conservative in our value by just looking at the number of specific dedicated users as opposed to visits, because otherwise it could amplify the output lower the impact tremendously. So we're trying to get at and be conservative by looking at the users. But Mike, you might want to add to that.
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I mean, the same question could be asked of any of these inputs. Some of them are easy to find, some of them aren't easy to find. Bottom line is, in our sector, in our day-to-day jobs, either as consultants or as practitioners, we don't do a great job of keeping stats. We don't do a great job of understanding the particular statistics around use, around number of uses per, or number of visits per user and that kind of thing. So it does require thinking a little bit harder about that and coming up with some of those estimates on your own, or you could reach out to us and we could possibly help you with that. But it is definitely about the user and not the amount of visits. So if you have a pool that you think is going to see 100,000 visits in a year, you don't put 100,000 into that. You put 100,000 divided by the average amount of times that you think each person might use that pool. I think this and the database and everything else is a bit of a call to action for us who are on the ground offering programs, operating facilities, to do better at collecting better data, better quality data. And the more you collect, the more the maybe academic and research community can pull from you and use to tell different types of stories, like I mentioned before. But right now, many of you, I'm not going to say everybody on this webinar is in this position, but many of you are in the best position to be able to articulate and depict utilization, visits, users, all of that information that's vital to telling our benefit story.
And we want that information, right? So again, this is another pitch for the infrastructure database, but also just to send us information that you're comfortable sharing. And actually that brings me to a question here posed by another anonymous user. When entering data into the calculator tool, is this collected by CPRA and CFLRI or any other organizational entity, or does it remain private?
I'm so glad that was asked. Thank you so much to who was asked asking about that one. We don't retain that information, CPRA or CFLRI or any other organization. Essentially, you enter it. Once it's cleared, it's gone. So we don't collect that information.
Yeah. Excellent. A comment now from Tom Sparrow, who suggests, and I think it's a good suggestion, that we poll the audience to confirm what other information would be useful for stakeholders engaged. So this chat is part of the recording. If you have other information that you would like, you would like us to be collecting, please put it in. We're building this. This will always be a free tool, and we're building it for you. So it needs to be useful. So please tell us how to make it useful. Okay. Here's a question another anonymous attendee is asking, are you breaking info out by Indigenous lead groups or projects? So this is a question about different population groups.
Yeah, we aren't at this point. The initial data that we're collecting is essentially a national and adults. So the supplementary report was the first time we started looking at provincial. And this year we are starting to look at various populations, and we're starting with children and youth and older adults, and we're hoping to get individuals with a disability, but we're only just starting to explore that. So as we have further information, we'll know whether or not we're able to modify it to these specific populations. So that could include Indigenous, but I would say at this point, the data available is limited to do that, but let's hope that in the future the data will be available to allow us to do that.
All right, thank you. I have a question from the one, the only, the inimitable Tim Van Dam. I'm guessing it's the same Tim Van Dam who's posing a question about the North, which is, are tree cover and vegetation cover equal for purposes of the measuring impact tool? Many places in the North have vegetation cover, but little or no tree cover. And where trees exist, they are mainly conifer. So this is a tree cover question, Christine.
Yeah. So in measuring impact, in the report, we looked at both. We looked at like urban greenness through vegetation, but then we also looked at, in terms of the calculator itself, we were very limited in terms of what data was available, research was available in Canada. But we attended a recent symposium where there might be access to better data on tree coverage. So hopefully we'll be able to, again, refine those indicators as we move along, as more data comes into the process and feeds into the initiative. So I'd say right now it's both, but tree coverage really is what's being used in the calculator. But like I said, we do hope to refine that in the next iteration.
Excellent. Just looking through the other questions here. We have 3 minutes. Oh, here's a great one from Baljinder Grayal. How could the calculator be used to make decisions on aging facilities if there is no new investment, some investment, or full investment? Which I think is a really important question, because what we know, and Christine, you may want to talk to this, is that we've calculated the infrastructure deficit to be north of $40 billion, just to get existing facilities fit for purpose. So how do we use the calculator for those situations?
Yeah, I might pass that off to either Gord or Mike to answer that one. But it's a great question. As Martin said, we limited it to the infrastructure that was in a fair, poor, or very poor state at this point. Those were, and of course, most of them fall within the fair. But I'm going to pass it over to you, Mike.
Yeah, I think what you can do is actually, and one of the things that Gord didn't talk about when he put his spreadsheet up was a status quo. And a status quo is doing nothing in the case of building new. But a status quo is also, if you have a facility that requires investment, status quo is keeping that facility going. And all of these benefits that can be articulated by just looking at your existing infrastructure and putting the inputs that you know about your existing facility would actually go away if that reinvestment wasn't made. So it's almost like, instead of thinking about this calculator applying to a new project, you can apply it to an existing facility. And then your storyline can be, if we don't reinvest in this facility, we're going to lose this much annual economic input, this many, or this, we're going to not be able to avert healthcare costs anymore because we're not going to have that tool or that asset that helps us do so. And it can actually be used sort of in reverse or in different ways, depending on what your specific situation is. But it doesn't require anything, like you still put the same inputs in. Instead of it being hypothetical, you put the inputs in that you know about the infrastructure that requires the investment.
That's amazing. Gord, do you have anything to add to any of this? I'm going to wrap it up now, but I want to make sure that you had an opportunity to share anything based on the last couple of questions.
No, I think I'm good, Martin. Thank you.
Perfect. So, folks, we are at the end of our time. It's exactly 1 o'clock. I want to really, really, once again, thank Christine Cameron for her leadership on this, the whole executive, John Spence, Mike Roma, and of course, Gord, our new president. Thank you to all of you for joining. You will notice that I did drop a couple of links into the chat around the infrastructure database, which is a project that's adjacent and complementary to this. We want you involved in that as well. And we generally want you to stay in touch. info@cpra.ca is how you can reach us anytime. Also, you can follow us on our various social media channels. There were quite a few questions that we did not get to in the chat. We're going to look at those, and we think this is an ongoing conversation. So as we distribute everything, we'll make all of this available on the measuring-impact.ca website, so you can download it there. But if there's any questions that we don't end up answering, or if new questions occur to you, please write to us. I really want to reinforce the idea that we are a collective, right? You are the sector. We're delivering enormous value to Canadians and improving the quality of life in every corner of the country. And I'm relatively new to this sector, and what I've been struck by is how much the sector is misunderstood, how it's evolving, and how it really is vital to creating the complete communities that we want to live in and raise our children in. So really, really pleased with the more than 200 people who turned up for this. This is an ongoing conversation. Stay in touch with us. Reach out anytime. We work for you, and we want to make sure that that you feel like you are part of this collective. So without further ado, we'll let everyone get on with their day, but thank you very much. Thanks, Christine, Mike. and Gord.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.